Hello and welcome to this week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. More and more often, I'm receiving phone calls from doctors that are saying, I have an opportunity to sell my practice, or I think I'm going to sell my practice. And that's where the conversation starts. That's not the end of it, about your practice and where it's going and what to do with it, and more importantly, what you're going to do. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to another episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman. I've been in practice for over 30 years, and I continue to work in a $1 million practice that I built, ran, and sold. I've taught, lectured, and coached our profession, and helped so many chiropractors build the practice and the life of their dreams. And now, I want to help you do the same. So here's today's show. As I said in the introduction, I get phone calls from doctors saying things like, I have an opportunity to sell my practice, or I'm thinking about selling my practice and doing something else. And while there's lots of wonderful companies that will help you with a practice evaluation and what can you really sell it for, and there's some metrics and different things to consider. Do you own the building? Do you have a lease? How long is the lease? Are there more options on the lease? The age of the equipment? Have you fully depreciated it? Is there any equipment that needs to or should be replaced? When was the last time the office was modernized and updated? So the carpeting, the painting, all those sorts of things. As well as, does the practice have any debt? Those are all different metrics, and there's only some of them that need to be considered when you're selling a practice. And there are multiple wonderful companies that can go through and do a practice evaluation. And there's a certain amount that they charge just to do the evaluation, so you know what the practice is worth. I think it's a wonderful exercise to go through when you're considering that. But first, and more importantly, when you have the opportunity to sell the practice, the very first question is, do you want to? Do you want to sell your practice? And if the answer to that is yes, then the question is, are you ready to sell the practice? Maybe you're just thinking about changing cities or moving to a different state. I've had doctors tell me, I'm really not sure, but it's a great opportunity, so I think I really need to jump on this because this doctor really wants to buy my practice. And again, the place to start is, do you want to and are you ready to sell the practice? Because after that sale, they're going to have given you a check. Awesome. So you got some extra money. Good. And then you're going to have a lot of time on your hands. And those are two different things that we need to discuss in a lot of detail. One of the best exercises that I have for anybody when they say, I'm going to sell my practice, is, and I ask them, so what is it you're going to do once you've sold the practice? And most often people say, oh, I want to travel. Well, you know what? Traveling is great and traveling is wonderful. And who doesn't love to travel, see different parts of the world and experience things? And that's wonderful. And ask yourself a question. What's the most number of weeks that you can imagine traveling for in any given year? Maybe it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 12. I'm going to travel 12 weeks a year. You know what? That's terrific. If you're traveling 12 weeks a year, now that's a lot, I think. But the question is, what are you going to do with the other 40 weeks of the year? That's a lot of time to fill. So what I have told every chiropractor that I have ever spoken to who calls me about this specific issue is, do yourself a favor, sit down and write out what you're going to do on a typical day for 10 days or 2 weeks of what that could look like, what that will look like. Because people say things like, oh, I'm going to play more golf. Oh, I'm going to play more pickleball. Oh, I'm going to ride my bicycle. Those are great activities. Love that. Hope you're living somewhere where you can do that for the 40 weeks of the year that you're not traveling. What does it really look like? Are you really thinking of playing golf 7 days a week? Well, no, because most of us who are thinking about selling a practice are at an age where, you know what? Our body can't handle playing golf 7 days in a row, on and on, week in, week out. There's a wonderful story about a man who retired. And he came downstairs to breakfast after he had retired. And he said to his wife, who had made breakfast for him, "Honey, what are we doing today?" And she said, "Oh, we're doing this and we're doing that and going to the grocery store," and had a whole list of things. And he said, "Awesome. Can I do that with you?" And she said, "Well, sure, if you want." And this went on every day for the first 3 weeks of his retirement. And as it got into the 4th week, he came downstairs and said to his wife, "Good morning, honey. What are we doing today?" And she looked at him and said, "Well, on my schedule today is to go to the grocery store. I have to drop something off at our son's house, some things that he needs, and then I'm going over to the store where our daughter works to meet with her because there's something we have to talk about. And by then it will be lunchtime. So if you want to do all of those things with me, you're welcome to. And immediately after lunch, we're then going to go see the divorce lawyer because I can't keep doing this." On the other hand, if you want to amuse yourself for the morning, we can meet for lunch. It'll be about 12:30. And then we can spend a couple hours together this afternoon. So, honey, you tell me, what are you doing this morning? And the man, who I knew well, took a sip of his coffee and said to his wife, "Lunch will be delightful. Have a good morning." And they went on to live a wonderful life together through the rest of their retirement, and they're both long gone now. But what are you going to do with your time is the question. Once you've written that out, what that looks like for 2 weeks, if you have the opportunity and you're really close to selling the practice, especially to a doctor who's already been there, what I would recommend that you do is plan to take a 2-week vacation, or better, a 2-week staycation. Hand things off to the associate, explain to the patients you're taking a vacation the way you normally do, and tell the office not to bother you unless there's something really, 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 really important that happens. Because you're pretending that you don't own the practice anymore. You're pretending that you're actually retired. And lo and behold, for 2 weeks, see what that really looks like. You're staying home, you're doing activities, you're going out and meeting with friends, having lunch, having dinners, maybe playing pickleball, golf, maybe tennis, or riding your bicycle, the other things that we had talked about. But what does it really look like? And over those 2 weeks, either you're going to fall in love with not seeing patients, or for the love of chiropractic, you can't wait to get back to it in some way, shape, or form. That's the question. It's a great question to ask and answer for yourself. So now we've discussed the time issue, let's talk about the other side of I have an opportunity to sell my practice. And what that comes down to is the money side. The very first question that I ask anybody when we're having this conversation regarding the money side is, do you have enough money to live the way you want to live for the rest of your life? Or said very simply, the only reason to sell your practice is because you've decided you have enough money. So do you? Do you have enough money for the rest of your life based on investments or other businesses that you own and things that you're doing? Do you know what it costs you to run your life on an annual basis? And again, I've helped many doctors go through this process. The easiest way to figure out what it really costs you on an annual basis is when you get to the end of the year, your accountant can tell you how much you took in, how much you made, and then look at how much you saved and how much you paid in taxes. That's the easiest way. It's not the most complete way, but it is the easiest. As doctors get even more serious, what I recommend that they do is put all of your expenses and payments that you make onto one single credit card, because that statement then begins to tell you exactly what you're really spending money on. There are some things you can't put on the credit card, but you can put them on automatic payment if you haven't already. Things like your electric bill, for example. And then also create a spreadsheet that has each of the categories listed out. So month by month, you know exactly what those payments are. Typical headers are things like the electric bill, the credit card bill, your health insurance bill, other checks that you had to write, cash that you took out of the bank and spent on whatever. I'm not a big fan of that category because that cash that you spent on whatever, you don't know what you're spending on. And there are very, very few things that you have to spend cash on that's unaccounted for. Better to put it on that credit card. But other categories would be things like maybe it's money you give your kids. If there are any really unique expenses, things like recarpeting parts of your house or some other home improvement project. And of course, if you're paying quarterly taxes, those quarterly tax payments are a line item on that spreadsheet. And doing that for an entire year starts to tell you exactly what you're spending money on. Doing that over a series of years, 2 years, 3 years, now you're finding out exactly what it costs you on a typical basis to run your life the way you like to run it. Now, of course, the only thing we haven't taken into account are some of the back-end things that maybe you run through your office that if you don't own the practice, you can't do things like that. Speak to your accountant about what those things are, can be, should be, shouldn't be, and value that in appropriately so you know what your real numbers are. What does it cost you to run your life and live the way you're choosing to live? Obviously, one that we left off that can be a big one is your mortgage payment. If your home is not paid off and you still have a mortgage, what you're really starting to talk about is when we're in retirement, it becomes a cash flow question. How much cash is flowing into my home, into my checkbook, so to speak, on a monthly basis to cover my expenses? Running a debt-free retirement is far superior, in my opinion, to running a retirement that has significant debts still associated with it. And yes, I'm well aware there can be some tax benefits to continue to carry a mortgage on your house, and that's a conversation between you and your accountant. What's going to make the most sense financially, because at some point, it does make sense to pay off that mortgage, in my opinion. Because if for no other reason, there's an emotional comfort of not owing any money to anybody because you own it, bottom line, outright. And as we're talking about the cash flow of retirement, the next question that I like to talk to people about is, what is your timeline, money goals for the rest of your life? Are you somebody that your goal is you want to die penniless? I want to die the same day that I spend my last nickel. And if that's what you want to do, that's just fine. Or perhaps there's a goal of, well, I want to leave X amount of money to charity, or I want to leave X amount of money to my children, or I want to leave X amount of money to some other cause that you find very important. So is it an investment income strategy where you're spending the interest, or is it a spend down schedule where I'm going to run out of money at a certain point? And obviously plan for longer because none of us know how long we're going to live. I always like to tell people, if you have figured out the money side of it, then don't even plan on Social Security in your equation at all. Social Security can become an additional cushion, and that's just fine. But if you can plan to make the retirement work without that Social Security cushion, all the better. But going back to I have an opportunity to sell my practice, how often have you thought to yourself, or how often have you spoken with friends, colleagues, or even patients when it comes to the idea of retirement, the response comes back, well, what the hell else would I do with myself? So there's so many people, and it typically, in my experience, is more men than women, that say they're just going to keep working because they don't know what else they would do. And I sincerely hope that there's still a passion, a love of what they're doing, that they're dedicating and using their valuable time for as the clock is ticking and the years are going by. But for us, the question is if you're thinking about you're reaching towards the end of your career, are you really ready to hang up your hands? Are you really ready to stop putting your hands on people and changing lives? Are you really ready to not care about people that have all sorts of chiropractic issues that you spent decades helping? Neck pains, back pains, difficulty moving, can't get out of a chair, those headaches, all those things that chiropractic symptomatically makes such a huge difference with, versus the other side of chiropractic, improving, optimizing someone's life so they can do so many wonderful things, so they can do all the things they want to do. Speaking of the things you want to do, would you believe right in the middle of recording this very episode, I received a phone call from a chiropractor telling me exactly what we're talking about right now. I have an opportunity to sell my practice. I'm not sure how I should structure the deal and what that could look like. So we spent 15 or 20 minutes on the phone talking through some ideas of what that could and should look like based on his specifics. And doctor, if you're listening to this episode, you know exactly who you are. And again, I thank you for your years of friendship, and I know you listen to and appreciate the show. But getting back to the point, when you talk about or think about retirement, experts will tell you that retirement has 3 stages, and they're typically about 10 years each. They talk about them as being the go-go years. That first decade, you're going and traveling and all over the world and doing all sorts of things, and that's wonderful. And the second 10 years they call the slow-go years. You're still going and traveling, but not as much. And then the third decade, they talk about the no-go years, where you're happy to sit and bounce your grandchild on your knee because you're not traveling. In fact, maybe your kids are traveling and you get to babysit. And experts will tell you that retirement gets cheaper the longer that you're retired because you're not doing the traveling, you're not doing so many other things. But again, what I advise is when you're looking at your retirement planning, assume that the costs are going to stay consistent. Now, I know there's inflation and I know things get more expensive, obviously, but if we're using everything in today's dollars and your investments are going to grow, or your Social Security, if you are adding that in, that's going to grow. There's a COLA, a cost of living adjustment on an annual basis. I think that's just fine. If you don't assume Social Security is going to be part of the numbers, and you assume that the cost is going to stay constant across the years, you're in a much better place to know that you're not going to run out of money and things are going to be just fine. And as we begin to close out this episode, I have to tell you, the vast majority of doctors that have called me over the last several years and have said the magic words, I have an opportunity to sell my practice, or I'm thinking about selling my practice. When we go through the questions and exercises that I've discussed over the last 15 minutes or so, the vast, vast majority of them come to the conclusion, it's not time for me to sell my practice yet. It's a great opportunity, but you know what? It's not the right time. I'm not ready for that. When you do decide that it is time, maybe you've made so much money that you just close the office. And I've had doctors tell me they want to do that also because they don't want to go through the hassle of selling it. I would urge you not to do that. It's your life's work. It has a value. And there's some other doc, probably some young doc, that would love to pick up your legacy and continue it forward. But again, only at the proper time. If you love what we do, changing lives and helping people, you know what? Rarely is there a good time to hang up your hands. There was a doctor here in Maryland who passed away in his 90s. And even though he was legally blind, he was still seeing patients 1 or 2 days a week, adjusting a handful of people who had been with him for a half a century or more. God bless his memory. And may all of us who work to change lives keep changing lives for as long as we possibly can. All right, and that's our show for today. If you have a question about today's show or your own practice, feel free to reach out at fortheloveofchiropractic.com. Before making changes to your practice, Be sure to seek legal advice regarding those changes and regulations in your state. For the Love of Chiropractic is an RGF production, all rights reserved. And thanks for listening. Original music provided by Hunter Rich Music.